Elijah Boone should have died in the dirt, but he woke in a cabin, stitched up by a stranger who said only one thing: "When you can ride again, I need you to kill a man for me." The sun beat down on Elijah Boone's back, making his shirt stick to him like glue. Dust swirled around his horse's hooves as they climbed the narrow trail. He hummed a little tune, thinking of the cool water he'd find in town. Suddenly, a shout ripped through the air. Before Elijah could react, men burst from the trees, guns blazing. The world exploded in chaos. His horse screamed and reared. Elijah felt a searing pain in his side as a bullet tore through his flesh. He tumbled from his horse, landing hard on the rocky ground. He looked up dazed and saw faces he thought he knew, men he'd shared campfires with, men he'd trusted. Now their eyes were cold and hard. They were looting his saddlebags, their laughter echoing in the sudden silence after the gunshots. One of them, a man with a cruel smile, leaned down. "Sorry, Elijah," he said, his voice dripping with false remorse. "Business is business." Then he kicked Elijah in the ribs, sending a fresh wave of pain through him. Darkness started to creep in at the edges of his vision. He heard the men ride away, their voices fading into the distance. He was alone, bleeding, and left for dead under the unforgiving sun. The last thing he saw was a vulture circling overhead, a dark omen in the clear blue sky. Time became a blur, a swirling mix of pain and nothingness. Sometimes Elijah felt the scorching sun on his skin, baking him like a piece of meat. Other times he was shivering uncontrollably, the cold seeping into his bones. He tasted blood in his mouth, a constant metallic tang. He drifted in and out of consciousness. Vague shapes danced before his eyes, dark figures, fleeting shadows. He thought he heard voices, whispers carried on the wind, but he couldn't understand what they were saying. Once he felt rain, a brief respite from the heat. He opened his mouth, trying to catch the precious drops, but it was gone as quickly as it came. He imagined cool water, clear and refreshing, but it was just a cruel trick of his mind. The pain was a constant companion, a dull ache that never left him. It throbbed in his side, in his head, in every part of his body. He tried to move, but his limbs felt heavy and unresponsive. He was trapped, a prisoner in his own broken body. He didn't know how long he lay there, dying, days, weeks. Time had lost all meaning. He was just a body, slowly fading away, waiting for the end to come. The vulture still circled. Warmth, that was the first thing Elijah noticed. A gentle, comforting warmth that seeped into his bones, chasing away the lingering chill. He blinked, his eyelids heavy, and slowly opened his eyes. He was lying in a bed, a real bed with soft blankets and a fluffy pillow. Sunlight streamed through a small window, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. The room was small but cozy, with wooden walls and a crackling fire in the hearth. The smell of pine filled the air. It was a stark contrast to the harsh, unforgiving landscape he remembered. He tried to sit up, but a sharp pain in his side stopped him. He looked down and saw bandages wrapped tightly around his torso. Scars crisscrossed his skin, a roadmap of his near-death experience. Where was he? How did he get here? The last thing he remembered was the vulture circling, waiting. Now he was safe, warm, and alive. He looked around the cabin, taking in the details. A worn wooden table stood in the corner, cluttered with books and papers. A rifle leaned against the wall, its barrel gleaming in the sunlight. A pot hung over the fire, emitting a savory aroma. Someone lived here. Someone had saved him, but who and why? The cabin door creaked open, and a man stepped inside. He was tall and lean, with eyes as gray as a winter sky. His face was weathered and lined, but his movements were surprisingly graceful. He carried himself with a quiet confidence that commanded attention. He didn't smile or offer a greeting. He simply stood there, watching Elijah with an intense gaze. His presence filled the small cabin, making it feel even smaller. "You're awake," he said, his voice calm and even. It was a voice that could soothe a frightened child or deliver a death sentence with equal ease. "I am Silas." Elijah tried to speak, but his throat was dry. He managed a raspy whisper, where am I?" "You are in the mountains," Silas replied, "far from anyone who would wish you harm." He walked over to the fire and stirred the pot, the metallic clang echoing in the silence. "You were close to death when I found you. You are lucky to be alive." Lucky, Elijah thought. He didn't feel lucky. He felt confused, disoriented, and strangely uneasy. There was something about Silas that made him nervous, a coldness that belied his calm demeanor. He sensed that his rescue came with a price, a heavy price. Silas turned from the fire, his gray eyes fixed on Elijah. The silence stretched, thick and heavy. Finally he spoke, his voice still calm but with an undeniable edge. "I saved your life, Elijah," he said. "I nursed you back from the brink. You owe me a debt." Elijah swallowed hard. He knew it was coming. What kind of debt? Silas's gaze intensified. "When you are well enough to ride, I need you to go to the town of Redemption." "Redemption," Elijah repeated, confused. "I've never heard of it." "It is a small town," Silas said. "Hidden away, you will find a man there named Cain." He paused, his eyes narrowing. "I need you to kill him." Elijah stared at Silas, stunned. Kill someone? He was no killer, he was just he wasn't sure what he was anymore, but he wasn't a murderer. "Kill him," he stammered. I can't do that, I don't even know him." Silas remained impassive. "You will and you must. This is the price of your life, Elijah Boone." Elijah spent the next few days in a turmoil of indecision. He couldn't shake the feeling of obligation to Silas, the man who had saved his life. But the thought of killing anyone, filled him with dread. He tossed and turned at night, haunted by nightmares of the ambush and the coldness in Silas's eyes. Silas, true to his nature, offered no further explanation or persuasion. He simply tended to Elijah's wounds, providing food and water, and waited. The silence between them was thick with unspoken tension. Finally, the day came when Elijah could ride again. Silas saddled a sturdy horse and placed a rifle in Elijah's hands. He also gave him a small pouch of coins and a map to Redemption. "I don't know why you want this man dead," Elijah said, his voice barely a whisper. "But I need to understand. Who is Cain? What has he done?" Silas's expression remained unchanged. "That is not for you to know. Your task is simple. Find Cain and end him. Do not fail me, Elijah. Your life depends on it." With that, he turned and walked back to the cabin, leaving Elijah alone with his horse and his terrible task. The seeds of doubt were sown. Was he truly saved, or merely a pawn in a darker game? The ride to Redemption was long and arduous. Elijah's side still ached with every jolt of the horse, a constant reminder of his brush with death. The map Silas provided was vague, leading him through winding mountain passes and across dry, dusty plains. He saw no one for days, just the endless expanse of the unforgiving landscape. Finally, as the sun began to dip below the horizon, he saw it, Redemption. It was a small, isolated town nestled in a valley, surrounded by towering cliffs. The buildings were old and weathered, their paint peeling and faded. A sense of quiet desperation hung in the air. As he rode into town, he felt eyes on him. People stopped what they were doing and stared, their faces etched with suspicion. The few children playing in the street scattered like frightened birds. A dog barked from behind a closed door. Redemption was a town holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. Elijah felt like an unwelcome intruder, a stranger stepping into a secret world. He knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that this was a place where secrets ran deep and danger lurked around every corner. He had arrived in Redemption, but would he ever find his own? Elijah dismounted in front of the only saloon in town, the last chance, and tied his horse to the hitching post. He took a deep breath, trying to steel himself for what he had to do. He had to find Cain, but how? He knew nothing about the man except that Silas wanted him dead. He pushed open the saloon doors, the hinges groaning in protest. The interior was dimly lit and smelled of stale beer and sawdust. A handful of men were scattered around the room, nursing their drinks. A piano player in the corner was playing a mournful tune. Elijah approached the bar, where a burly man with a handlebar mustache was polishing glasses. "Whiskey," Elijah said, his voice rough. The bartender poured him a drink without a word. Elijah took a sip, the liquor burning its way down his throat. "I'm looking for someone," he said, placing a coin on the counter. "A man named Cain." The bartender's eyes narrowed. He stopped polishing the glass and stared at Elijah. "What do you want with Cain?" he asked, his voice low and suspicious. Elijah hesitated. "Just need to ask him some questions," he said, hoping it sounded convincing. The bartender didn't seem convinced. He wiped down the counter, avoiding Elijah's gaze. "Cain's a good man," he said finally. "You won't find anyone here with a bad word to say about him." He paused, then added, "Maybe you should just move on." Elijah left the saloon, feeling more confused than ever. If Cain was such a good man, why did Silas want him dead? He decided to try a different approach. He walked down the street to the general store, hoping to glean some information from the shopkeeper. The shopkeeper, a thin man with a worried expression, eyed Elijah with suspicion. He reluctantly answered Elijah's questions about Cain, confirming that he was the town doctor and a pillar of the community. "He's helped a lot of folks in this town," the shopkeeper said, his voice hesitant. "And saved lives he has." Next, Elijah approached a woman sweeping her porch. She was older, with a sharp tongue and a keen eye. She was more forthcoming, gossiping about Cain's kindness and generosity. "He never asks for anything in return," she said, "always willing to lend a hand." But there was a flicker of something else in her eyes, a hint of fear. He returned to the saloon, hoping the bartender might be more talkative after a few more drinks. But the bartender remained silent, his gaze fixed on Elijah with a knowing look. It was clear, the town of Redemption was protecting Cain. But why, and what was the secret they were hiding? That night Elijah couldn't sleep. The image of Cain, the kind doctor, helping the sick and needy, clashed violently with Silas's cold command. He tossed and turned, the meager bed in the boarding house feeling like a bed of nails. He dreamt of the ambush, the faces of his betrayers contorted with greed and hatred. Then the dream shifted. He was back in the cabin, but Silas's face was distorted, monstrous. His eyes glowed with an unnatural light, and his voice was a low, guttural growl. "Kill him, Elijah," Silas hissed in the dream. "Kill him, or you will suffer a fate worse than death." Elijah woke up in a cold sweat, his heart pounding in his chest. He sat up in bed, trying to catch his breath. The dream had shaken him to his core. He looked out the window at the dark, silent town. Was Silas truly a savior, or something far more sinister? He thought of the vulture, circling, waiting. Was he still circling even now? Was he destined to be a killer, a pawn in someone else's game? He had to find out the truth about Cain. He had to know why Silas wanted him dead. His life, and perhaps his very soul, depended on it. The lines were blurring between savior and captor, right and wrong. He was caught in a web of deceit, and he didn't know which way to turn. The next morning, Elijah decided to observe Cain more directly. He positioned himself across the street from the doctor's office, watching as patients came and went. He saw mothers with sick children, farmers with injured limbs, and elderly folks struggling with aches and pains. Each one emerged from Cain's office looking relieved, grateful. Cain himself was a tall, gentle man with kind eyes and a soothing voice. He moved with a quiet grace, radiating an aura of calm and competence. Elijah watched as a young girl, no older than 7, was carried into the office, her face pale and feverish. Her mother was distraught, her eyes filled with worry. Hours later, the girl emerged, walking on her own, a faint smile on her face. Cain stood in the doorway, watching them go, a look of satisfaction on his face. Elijah felt a pang of guilt. How could he kill a man who brought so much comfort and healing to this town? He was being asked to extinguish a light in a place that desperately needed it. The weight of his task grew heavier with each passing moment. He was no closer to understanding why Silas wanted Cain dead, but he was further than ever from being able to carry out the request. The image of Silas's cold eyes, however, remained a haunting reminder of the debt he owed. Driven by a desperate need for answers, Elijah decided to break into Cain's office. He waited until nightfall, when the town was shrouded in darkness and silence. He crept through the deserted streets, his heart pounding in his chest. He picked the lock on the back door of the office, his hands trembling. Once inside, he lit a match, illuminating the room with a flickering glow. The office was neat and orderly, filled with medical instruments and bottles of medicine. He searched the drawers and cabinets, finding nothing out of the ordinary. Just when he was about to give up, he noticed a loose floorboard under a rug. He lifted the board and found a hidden compartment. Inside, there was a small wooden box. He opened it, his breath catching in his throat. It was filled with strange books, bound in leather and covered in unfamiliar symbols. He flipped through the pages, his eyes widening in disbelief. The books were filled with diagrams and incantations, hinting at dark rituals and forbidden knowledge. A chill ran down his spine. What was Cain hiding? Was he a healer or something else entirely? The respect he had garnered from the townsfolk now felt like a carefully constructed facade. A sense of unease settled over him, deeper and more profound than anything he had felt before. He was getting closer to the truth, but the truth seemed far more dangerous than he could have ever imagined. As Elijah stared at the unsettling books, fragments of memory flickered in his mind. He recalled Silas tending to his wounds in the cabin, but now the memories were tainted with a new perspective. He remembered Sila's chanting in a low, rhythmic voice, a language he didn't understand. He remembered the strange herbs and powders Silas used, the way they smelled of earth and something else, something ancient and unsettling. He remembered the searing pain in his side, but also a strange, unnatural warmth that spread through his body as Silas worked. It wasn't just healing, it was something more. Something magical. He recalled Silas's intense gaze, the way his eyes seemed to pierce through him to see into his very soul. Now he realized that Silas wasn't just looking at him. He was probing, searching, perhaps even influencing him. The pieces started to fall into place, painting a disturbing picture. Silas hadn't just saved him, he had used him. He had manipulated him, perhaps even altered him for some unknown purpose. The debt he owed Silas wasn't just a matter of gratitude, it was a binding spell, a magical contract. He had to escape redemption. He had to get away from Cain and Silas and find a way to break free from the dark forces that were closing in around him. But how, and where could he go? He was trapped not just by circumstance but by magic. Elijah decided to confront Cain. He couldn't run, he needed answers. He walked to Cain's office, the sun barely rising, casting long shadows across the street. He found Cain inside, tending to his instruments. "I know about the books," Elijah said, his voice firm despite his fear. Cain didn't flinch, he simply looked up, his expression unreadable. "So you've been snooping," he said calmly. "What are you?" Elijah demanded. "Are you a healer or a sorcerer?" Cain sighed. "It's not that simple," he said. "Those books, they contain knowledge that has been passed down through generations, knowledge that can be used for good or for evil." "Silas sent me here to kill you," Elijah said, his voice trembling. "Why?" Cain's eyes darkened. "Silas is a dangerous man," he said. "He seeks to control this town, to feed on its fear and despair. He uses magic to manipulate people, to bend them to his will." "But why you?" Elijah asked. "Because I stand in his way," Cain said. "I protect this town from him. I use my knowledge to fight his darkness." He paused. "Silas wants you to kill me, but he hasn't told you the whole story, has he?" "What story?" Elijah asked, his mind racing. "The story of why Silas really saved you," Cain said. "The story of what he plans to do with you." Before Cain could elaborate, a gust of wind slammed the office door shut. The room grew cold and the shadows deepened. Silas stood in the doorway, his eyes glowing with an unnatural light. "I see you've been talking," Silas said, his voice dripping with menace. "I told you not to trust him, Elijah." Elijah stepped back, fear gripping his heart. Silas's presence was overwhelming, radiating a power that was both terrifying and alluring. "He's lying to you, Elijah," Cain said, his voice urgent. "Silas is the one you should fear." "Silence," Silas roared, and a wave of energy slammed into Cain, throwing him against the wall. "Now, Elijah," Silas said, turning his gaze on him, "it's time to fulfill your debt, kill him." Elijah stood frozen, torn between his obligation to Silas and his growing suspicion that Cain was telling the truth. He looked from Silas's glowing eyes to Cain's pleading face. "He wants to use you, Elijah," Cain gasped, struggling to his feet. "He wants to make you a vessel for his power." Silas laughed, a chilling sound that echoed through the room. "Don't listen to him, Elijah. I am offering you power beyond your wildest dreams. All you have to do is kill him." Elijah's hand trembled as he reached for his gun. The choice was his, and the fate of redemption hung in the balance. Elijah made his choice. He lowered his gun, his hand shaking but his resolve firm. He couldn't kill Cain, he wouldn't be a pawn in Silas's game. "I won't do it," Elijah said, his voice ringing with newfound determination. "I won't kill him." Silas's face contorted with rage. "You dare defy me," he roared. "You owe me your life." "I owe you nothing," Elijah said. "You saved me for your own selfish reasons. You wanted to use me to control me." "Fool," Silas spat. "You have no idea what you're up against." He raised his hands and the room filled with a swirling vortex of dark energy. "You will regret this, Elijah Boone. You will all regret this." Cain, despite his injuries, stepped forward, drawing power from the earth beneath his feet. "He feeds on fear, Elijah," Cain said. "Don't let him control you, fight him." A battle erupted, a clash of magic and will. Silas unleashed bolts of dark energy while Cain countered with spells of protection and healing. Elijah, caught in the middle, felt the raw power surging around him. He knew he couldn't stand idly by. He had to choose a side and he had to fight. He might not have magic, but he had something else: the will to survive, the determination to break free from Silas's control. He was no longer a pawn, he was a player in this deadly game. He was ready to fight for redemption. Remembering the ambush, Elijah used the element of surprise. While Silas and Cain were locked in their magical duel, he moved quickly, dodging bolts of energy and shards of glass. He remembered how the men had attacked him, their faces filled with greed and malice. He wouldn't make the same mistake. He grabbed a heavy medical instrument from a nearby table, a large metal clamp, and waited for his moment. Silas, distracted by Cain's spells, was momentarily vulnerable. Elijah lunged forward and slammed the clamp onto Silas's wrist, severing the flow of energy. Silas roared in pain and surprise, his concentration broken. Cain seized the opportunity, unleashing a powerful spell that sent Silas reeling backward. "Now, Elijah," Cain shouted. "He's weakened. There's an amulet around his neck. Destroy it." Elijah saw the amulet, a dark obsidian stone hanging from a silver chain. He knew what he had to do. He charged at Silas, dodging another blast of energy. He reached for the amulet, but Silas grabbed his arm, his grip like iron. "You can't stop me, Elijah," Silas hissed. "I am too powerful." Elijah looked into Silas's eyes, seeing the darkness that consumed him. He knew that if he failed, redemption would be doomed. He had to find the strength to fight, to break free. He had to save this town, even if it meant sacrificing himself. With a surge of adrenaline, Elijah headbutted Silas, sending him staggering back. The force of the blow loosened Silas's grip, and Elijah wrenched his arm free. He grabbed the amulet with both hands and slammed it against the edge of a table. The obsidian stone shattered, releasing a wave of energy that sent Silas flying across the room. The dark vortex that had filled the room dissipated, and the unnatural glow faded from Silas's eyes. Silas lay on the floor, weakened and gasping for breath. Cain, still injured, struggled to his feet and approached him. "It's over, Silas," Cain said, his voice filled with sorrow. "Your reign of terror is finished." Silas looked up at them, his eyes filled with hatred. "You haven't won," he rasped. "This is just the beginning." Suddenly the cabin began to shake. The walls trembled and the floorboards creaked. The mountains outside seemed to groan in protest. "What's happening?" Elijah asked, fear creeping into his voice. Cain's face was grim. "Silas's power was tied to this place," he said. "Now that the amulet is destroyed, the magic is unraveling. This whole place, it's going to disappear." They had to get out now. They stumbled out of the cabin, the ground lurching beneath their feet. The landscape was shifting and twisting, as if the very fabric of reality was coming undone. The once cozy cabin was now a dilapidated shack, surrounded by a desolate wasteland. Silas, despite his weakened state, was already on his feet, his eyes burning with renewed fury. He raised his hands, and the earth began to tremble even more violently. "You think you've won?" he screamed. "I will destroy you both." Cain, drawing on the last of his strength, erected a magical shield around them, protecting them from the worst of the chaos. "We have to get out of here, Elijah," he said. "This place is collapsing." They ran, dodging falling rocks and collapsing trees. The landscape was transforming before their eyes, the familiar mountains morphing into jagged, unnatural peaks. Suddenly a chasm opened up in front of them, swallowing the path whole. They were trapped. Silas stood on the other side of the chasm, his figure silhouetted against the swirling chaos. "This is the end, Elijah Boone," he said, his voice echoing across the wasteland. "You should have listened to me." Elijah knew they were out of time. He had to do something, anything, to stop Silas before it was too late. He looked around, desperate for a way out. Then he saw it, a narrow ledge clinging precariously to the edge of the chasm. It was a long shot, but it was their only chance. "I'm going across," Elijah said, grabbing his rifle. "Cover me." Cain nodded, summoning a shield of energy to protect Elijah from Silas's attacks. Elijah took a deep breath and started to edge his way along the narrow ledge. The wind howled around him, threatening to knock him off balance. The chasm yawned below, promising certain death. Silas unleashed a torrent of dark energy, but Cain's shield held strong. Elijah pressed on, inching his way closer to the other side. Suddenly, the ledge crumbled beneath his feet. He lost his footing, his rifle slipping from his grasp and plummeting into the chasm. He dangled precariously, his fingers clinging to the edge. Elijah, Cain shouted, struggling to maintain his shield. Silas laughed, his voice filled with triumph. This is the end, Elijah Boone, you cannot escape your fate. Elijah looked up at Silas, seeing the darkness that had consumed him. He knew he couldn't give up. He had to find the strength to pull himself up to stop Silas once and for all. He closed his eyes, focusing on the image of redemption on the faces of the people he had come to know. He would not let them down. With a surge of adrenaline, he pulled himself up, scrambling onto the other side of the chasm. He was battered and bruised, but he was alive, and he was ready to finish this fight. He charged at Silas, his fists clenched. Silas, weakened but still dangerous, unleashed another blast of energy. Elijah dodged it, the blast hitting the ground behind him and sending shards of rock flying. He reached Silas and tackled him to the ground. They wrestled, Silas's strength failing, Elijah's fueled by desperation and determination. Elijah landed a series of blows, each one fueled by the anger and betrayal he had felt. Finally, he pinned Silas down, his fist raised. He looked into Silas's eyes, seeing the last flicker of darkness fading away. "Why?" Elijah asked, his voice hoarse. "Why did you do this?" Silas just stared back, his expression empty. Then with a final shudder, he went still. Elijah stood up, exhausted but triumphant. He looked around, and what he saw made his blood run cold. The cabin was gone, vanished without a trace. The mountains had disappeared, replaced by a desolate, cursed landscape of barren rock and twisted trees. The beautiful valley was an illusion, a trick of Silas's magic. "It's over," Cain said, his voice weak but filled with relief. "He's gone." But as Elijah looked at the desolate landscape, he knew that the fight was far from over. The darkness that had consumed Silas was still out there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for its chance to strike again. Cain looked at Elijah, his eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you," he said. "You saved us all." Elijah shook his head. "It wasn't just me," he said. "We did it together." They looked at each other, two men bound by a shared experience, forever changed by the events that had transpired. They knew that the road ahead would be long and difficult. They had to rebuild redemption, to cleanse it of the darkness that had consumed it. Elijah thought of leaving, of returning to the life he had known before the ambush, but he couldn't. He had found something in redemption, something he had been searching for his whole life, a purpose. "I'm staying," Elijah said, his voice firm. "I'll help you rebuild this town." Cain smiled, a genuine smile that reached his eyes. "I'm glad to hear it," he said. "We can use all the help we can get." Together they turned and began to walk towards redemption, towards a future that was uncertain but filled with hope. Elijah Boone, the man who had been left for dead, had found a new life, a new purpose. He was scarred both inside and out, but he was free. He was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, knowing that he was not alone. The vulture was gone.